Hello everyone, we're live. And today I would like to tell you guys that, as I mentioned, but I didn't technically mention, but our show will be live every day, or should I say every night, at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. So look forward to that. If you are Pacific, that is 9 p.m. If you are Central, that is also 9 p.m. So look forward to that, all coming soon on our show, Daily Conversations with Jeremiah Patterson. Also, go check out our podcast. The newest episode has been posted on the Jeremiah Patterson Show. This is Daily Conversations with Jeremiah Patterson. Until YouTube lets the 90-day pass go through, we'll then change the name of this YouTube channel back to Jeremiah Patterson. Hello, everyone. Today's November 19th, 2018, and this is episode 122 of the Jeremiah Patterson Show. That's our podcast. Welcome to our special edition coverage of former U.S. President Ronald Wilson Reagan. Ronald Reagan, in my opinion, was a great Republican president. Ronald Reagan was born February 6, 1911 in Topeka, Illinois. His wife was Nancy Reagan, and Nancy Reagan developed the Just Say No to Drugs campaign. Ronald Reagan died on June 5th, 2004. WhiteHouse.gov says, quote, "At the end of his 2 terms in office, Ronald Reagan viewed the satisfaction of the achievements of his Innovate program known as the Reagan Revolution, which aimed to reinvigorate the American people and reduce the reliance upon government. He had fulfilled his campaign pledge of 1980 to restore the great confident roar of American progress and growth of optimism." Here's some information from WhiteHouse.gov. Quote, "Ronald Reagan won the Republican presidential nomination in 1980 and chose as his running mate former Texas Congressman and United States Ambassador George Bush. Voters troubled inflation into office. Wow. I want to highlight that there. It says, as his running mate, former Texas Congressman and United States Ambassador George Bush. Voters troubled inflation, and by the year-long confident in Iran swept the Republican ticket, Reagan won 489 votes to 49 for Jimmy Carter. His vice president was George Herbert Walker Bush, also known to some people as George H.W. Bush. The assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan surprised the nation. Just 2 months into his presidency, 6 shots fired at President Ronald Reagan. Here's the story. John Hinckley Jr. fired 6 shots at Ronald Reagan on March 30th, 1981. On January 20th, 1981, Ronald Reagan took office. Only 69 days later, he was shot by an assassin, but quickly recovered and returned to duty. His grace and wit during the dangerous incident caused his popularity to roar. Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy took a bullet for the president that day. Secret Service agents are required to do this. It's a part of their job. Ronald Reagan almost died that day. If it wasn't for Agent Tim McCarthy and the excellent, fast-thinking women and men of George Washington Hospital in Washington, D.C., President Reagan probably would not have been here. If it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for the excellent men and women of George Washington Hospital in Washington, D.C., and if it wasn't for Agent Tim McCarthy, who thought so fast to take a bullet for the president, if it wasn't for him, history would have been different that day. It would have been just like the JFK assassination. When John F. Kennedy was assassinated and Lyndon B. Johnson took office that same day, with Jacqueline Kennedy standing by his side and his wife, Lyndon Baines, and with his wife, Claudia Johnson, standing by his side, also known as Lady Bird Johnson. President Reagan helped destroy and bring down the Berlin Wall. put up by the communist Russians from 1961 to 1989. President Reagan had a great sense of humor and negotiated with foreign leaders. President Reagan believed in peace, in power, in justice. President Reagan believed in peace and power and justice. Ronald Reagan suffered from Alzheimer's disease for the last years of his life. He passed away from pneumonia. Well, that is the life and legacy of Ronald Wilson Reagan. Share this episode with a friend. Share this video with a friend. Thanks for watching. Check out the Jeremiah Patterson Show. Lots of episodes, by the way. I can put it as, quote, 120-something episodes. I can't name it from the top of my head. But yes, we have lots of episodes in our podcast. So please go check it out because it's very important. This news. This script that I typed up for today's episode, on today's podcast, on today's show, this script. This Ronald Wilson Reagan script that I typed up for you guys. It's important. History needs to know this. Our government as a people needs to know this. And not many people know this story. Not many people know that the 40th president of the United States, Ronald Wilson Reagan, was assassinated. Attempt assassination. John Hinckley Jr. wanted to kill President Reagan to sort of, he wanted to impress Judy Foster. Judy Foster was a girl that he liked, a girl that he had a crush on. Judy Foster. He said, oh, I'm going to kill the president to impress Judy Foster. He even wrote that in a notebook. Ronald Reagan's killer, or should I say not killer, Ronald Reagan's assassin, John Hinckley Jr., was released after years of killing him. Nancy Reagan died in 2016. Ronald Reagan passed away from pneumonia in 2004. Just 1 year before I was born. 2004, Ronald Reagan passed away from pneumonia. Ronald Reagan was a great president. He will always be remembered in history as the 40th president of the United States. Let's think of it this way. If history turned out differently that day, would the 41st president have been George Herbert Walker Bush? Would it? In fact, I think George Herbert Walker Bush was the 41st president. I'm not sure there. But if history turned out that day, would George Herbert Walker Bush immediately had been sworn in as the next president of the United States so suddenly? What if that day history turned out as Agent Tim McCarthy did not think so fast, did not think so suddenly, and that day turned out totally different? What if that happened on that day? What if on that day, the Ronald Reagan assassination, of which would have been if Agent Tim McCarthy did not think so fast, if President Reagan was killed that day, it would not have been known as the Ronald Reagan attempt assassination. It would have been known as the Ronald Reagan assassination. And if that happened that day, I could compare the Ronald Reagan assassination with the JFK assassination. I do not believe Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. And we still cannot prove that to this day. The Warren Commission, which was built and established to oversee the JFK assassination, they were investigating it, they could not uncover that. Asked hearings after hearings, and then that day, the next day, Jack Ruby killed Lee Harvey Oswald, who was arrested, and Jack Ruby was arrested as well. Lee Harvey Oswald was buried and killed. Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy took a bullet for the president that day. Secret Service agents are required to do this. Ronald Reagan almost died that day. He almost died that day. Ronald Reagan is thought to be the oldest president in history. Ronald Reagan was elected at the age of 69. Ronald Reagan was elected at the, let me say that again for you. Ronald Reagan was elected at the age of 69. I believe he was a 2-term president. Ronald Reagan was a great president. In fact, when Nancy Reagan went to the RNC convention, she talked about her husband and she started to cry a little bit because Ronald Reagan was suffering from Alzheimer's disease for the last years of his life. For the last years of his life. And he died from pneumonia on June 5th, 2004. That's the explained story of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan won the election in 1980. He nominated Texas Congressman and United Nations Ambassador George Bush. Voters troubled by inflation and the year-long confinement. George Bush was a Republican president as well. His wife, Barbara Bush, just recently passed away. Sudden death. She was a great person. She is a great person for children. She's a great inspiration for children. Practically me, myself. Barbara Bush. Wow. The life and legacy of Barbara Bush. A life well spent. Barbara Bush was a great person. And we can prove that by history. We can prove that. If you like to disagree with me, that's on you. But I think personally that she was a great person. Barbara Bush was a person who understood you. A person who loved you. A person who could kind of talk you into things and like inspire you. Barbara Bush inspired people to pursue their dreams and to go harder. Barbara Bush was a great person. This video was originally just meant for the Ronald Reagan coverage. There was lots to talk about today. Lots to talk about. The Berlin Wall that was put up by the communist Russians in 1961, it wasn't such a good time period. At that time, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy was president of the United States. And by that time, we were trying to get out of this Cuban Missile Crisis. President Kennedy saved us from that, which made him such a great, charming, young president. He was awesome. President John Fitzgerald Kennedy saved us from the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, if that Cuban Missile Crisis had happened, how the United States had turned out now, that would have been put and that would have been placed into history books as the Cuban Missile War. In other words, it would have been put into history books as not the Cuban Missile Crisis, but the Cuban Missile War. I mean, President Kennedy practically saved us from this. And Ronald Reagan, in that speech, he said, quote, "Bring down this wall." And in 1989, that wall was brought down. Because of the brave and the beautiful speech of Ronald Wilson Reagan. For many years, that side of the country was divided. We're going to have a special episode of what happened 55 years ago on November 22nd. Coming soon to you guys, this YouTube channel. and our podcast. For those of you who are listening to me on YouTube and you want to get my podcast and you want to listen to my podcast, I'll put that link in the description down below for you to listen to it on our special Anchor website. Or if you'd like me to record it myself, I could do that again, but that wasn't very professionally when I recorded that the last time. For those of you watching this video at home, in your car, not in your car, it's not safe, at home, at school, wherever you may be, I want you to know that this government was built on democracy. We are living in a democratic world. Not in a democratic world. This is a democratic government. This is a country, a free country, a country where Americans have the right to do whatever they choose in a lawful way. Today we saw, even with current events in history right now, not in history, but currently right now, President Donald Trump did not nominate, but he put Matthew Whitaker in the Justice Department without Senate confirmation, which is quote unconstitutional, because the president is supposed to the president can nominate someone for a Justice Department or a cabinet position, but the president has to have Senate confirmation. And it says that in Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution. Will Matt Whitaker go on as an unconfirmed attorney general by the Supreme Court? Let's not forget he's an acting attorney general, not confirmed by the United States Senate. The president can nominate a cabinet official, an ambassador, or any other high position, but he has to have Senate confirmation. And right now, the Republicans have control over the Senate. President Trump tweeted today, quote, well, I can't technically quote it, but President Trump tweeted today, the Democrats, you guys are, I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember what he said. He says, you guys are talking about unconfirmed Matt Whitaker when Robert Mueller wasn't even confirmed by the Senate. That's some of what President Trump said, at least what I remember at the top of my brain, top of my head. Robert Mueller cannot be appointed. He can't be appointed. That's a job, Mr. President. He can't be confirmed by the United States Senate. That's a job in the Justice Department. Or not even the Justice Department. Robert Mueller is a special counsel who oversees the who is in charge of the Russia investigation. What do you think is in the Robert Mueller report? By the way, President Trump is writing a handwritten report to give to Robert Mueller. In other words, this is Robert Mueller. I'm President Trump. Give this to Robert Mueller. What is in the Russia investigation? What is in Robert Mueller's report? That's what the news and media is dying for. That's what we're dying to know. I want to know personally because I have followed this story so many times on our podcast, The Jeremiah Patterson Show. So many times on this YouTube channel. I want to know what's in that report. Robert Mueller, I cannot wait for him to release that report. And the new Democrats that are about to take over the House? Well, let's brace ourselves. Because the Democrats are coming. The Democrats can subpoena the president. The Democrats can demand President Trump's tax returns. Remember that crazy New York Times op-ed? And that piece written by the New York Times? Must have took a lot of work because that was a very long piece. I didn't get to read the whole thing, but I got to read some paragraphs of it. And I was like, wow. President Trump receiving $20,000 at the age of 3? A 3-year-old receiving $20,000. What is he going to do with that? He was a millionaire by age 8. By age 8. And if you don't believe me, if you don't believe me, at the end of this video, go down in the description below, and I'll have a link for you about all of this. Many people are saying that President Trump is one of the most unqualified people for office. Personally, I do think that as well. Donald Trump ran practically as a joke. He didn't think he was going to win. It's like, oh, I'm going to run for president. Multi-billionaire. Even the news people doubted him. Even President Obama doubted him. But on election night, 2016, Donald Trump surprised everyone. He surprised everyone. People were scared. They're like, oh my gosh, Donald Trump is going to be president for the next 4 years. What am I going to do? It was scary. It was a sad time for Americans, young Americans particularly. Lots of Americans. Just that day when Donald Trump was elected president of the United States, the American people and the Trump supporters elected Donald Trump as president of the United States. We can recall that day as now a historical, surprising day in history. We can do that.